Hi BookTube and happy Friday. Instead of doing my normal Friday reads video, I'm going to be doing a wrap up of all of the books I read in April. I have my handy dandy notebook where I kept a tally of the different books I'm reading for the different events because I was participating in several events. So I started the month out with doing Katie over at Books and Things TBR Clear Out, and I read a total of 13 physical books off my shelf. So yay for that. I read books for Old School April, and I read 6 books for that event. And then National Poetry Month, I read 2 poetry collections, and then I did a miscellaneous other category and I read 13 books for that. Oh, and then Gladys Tabor week. Elizabeth over at Lizzie Faye Loves Books decided to host an event for Gladys Tabor because it was her birthday week, birthday during 1 week, and so she invited me along with several other booktubers to celebrate all things Gladys Tabor. So I read 1 book for that. So I read a total of 20 books. Yes, 13 physical books, 6 ebooks, and 1 audiobook. So let's get into the books themselves. So let's see, we'll start with the Gladys Tabor, since there's just 1 book in that category. And I read Spring Harvest. This is seems to be like a novelization of Gladys Tabor's experience, at least somewhat, because it pulls a lot from her father. This takes place in a small town, and it's just following the different people at the university, whether it's, you know, people in the dorm room or the teachers or the helpers, the parents of the kids. And it was really interesting to read, considering I've only read her nonfiction before this. She was famous for her Still Meadow series, where she talks about her house in like a just small town, Connecticut. But she grew up in different areas, and so yeah, this follows that. And if you want to learn more about Gladys Tabor, I will try to remember to leave a link in the description below to all of the hosts for Gladys Tabor week, because there's a plethora of videos related to Gladys Tabor, and she's just a wonderful, comforting author to read. Okay, for National Poetry Month, I read, let's see here, I reread this book, Once in the West by Christian Wyman. And I had mentioned when I picked this book for my TBR that I had read this author before, but I can't remember which book. Come to find out, it was this one that I had read years ago. And so this book is just filled with anger and rage, I feel like. Sorrow. There's lots of like strong emotions. Let's see if it's a description on the back here. Yeah, intense and intimate as poetry gets, from the suffering of primal silence that it plumbs to the rock shriek of joy that achieves and enables. See, this is just full of raw emotions, because the author was dealing with a lot when he was writing this, and you could really feel that. And so it was interesting to read. And then the other book, the other poetry collection, An Ordinary Life, poems by B.H. Fairchild. This is a poet I've never heard of before, so I'm not sure how well known he is. It says like a light cover, so it's hard to pick up here, but as kind of like the cover kind of foretells, it's like a small town, or alludes to. This is following maybe his experience in Kansas. I think it was Kansas. I read this at the beginning of the month, so I can't exactly remember. But I really liked the first part, where it was the poetry, and then the second part was the prose poetry. That I didn't get along with so much. It was like with a block of text as the prose poetry. I am not a poetry reviewer by no means, but I really like the first part where you get a feel for the small town life, and just his thoughts on it was interesting to read. So I'm happy to have read some poetry, because last year I tried to read 1 poetry collection a month. This year I haven't done so good with that, but I read 2 this month, in April, so that kind of counts for March and April. You know, like I'm slowly getting back to reading 1 a month. Okay, so then let's do the Old School April. And I read mostly the R.L. Stine books. So this one I actually found at a little free library, which is perfect during the month of April, because I grew up reading the Fear Street books. I didn't read the Goosebumps. So this is a bind up of the first 4 books. It's called The Beginning. And the first 4 books are The New Girl, The Surprise Party, The Overnight, and Missing. I read books 1 and 3, but so I read books 2 and 4. So that's The Surprise Party, where there was these kids where there was a death the year before, and so their friend group broke up, but then one of the friends that moved away is coming back, and so the main character is deciding to throw a surprise party for her, and then mayhem ensues. And then Missing, I thought was interesting because the kid, two brother and sister, they throw a big party. Speaking of surprise parties, they throw a party because their parents aren't home yet, and they typically are out late working, so that they have a good old time. And then the next morning they wake up and their parents are still missing, and they continue to be missing. There's no phone call, there's no note, nothing. And so it's like, what is happening with the parents? So these were fun, like, throwback books, and yay for free library finds. This came out, I think, fairly recently, 2020. And it's in really good condition. So yes, read those two. And then another Fear Street book I read was Fear Street's Super Chiller Broken Hearts. It says Valentine's Day can be a killer, and this is all about murders taking place at Valentine's Day. And it says roses are red, corpses are blue. On Valentine's Day, you'll die too. So this is a fun, quick read. It's playing Josie and Melissa. I can't remember any of these characters' names, so like, thank goodness for the cover. But yeah, this is a quick read. And then going back to the Goosebumps series, I read One Day at Horrorland. I love this cover. This is book number 16, and it says Enter If You Dare. And this is following a family who are on their way to an amusement park, but they get lost and can't find it. But they stumble upon this amusement park and decided to stop. And when they park and get out of their car blows up. So now they're stuck, whether they want to be at this amusement park or not. And so they immediately split up as soon as they get into this amusement park, even though, you know, there's these like creatures walking around. And you know, everyone thinks they're in costume. These creatures are in costume, but they're not. But they split up, and the kids are going one way, the parents are going the other. That doesn't make sense, especially when this was written. There was no cell phones or anything like that to you know, locate where your children are at this gigantic amusement park. But so they all go on these adventures and these rides where things happen unexpectedly. Like they get on a slide, and the slide doesn't shoot you out at the where you would think you would go. If you select one of the slides that's a mystery slide that you don't know which one's the mystery slide, you get sent off like way in back and beyond. And so but this was lots of fun to read and perfect for the summer. And then I read Phyllis A. Whitney, Nobody Likes Trina. I read a lot of Phyllis A. Whitney when I was in like fifth, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, around that time. She wrote mostly goth, at least what I read from her was her gothic suspense novels following like typically it's a woman character, and she gets thrown into like a big spooky house, something like that, and she's trying to get used to the town or the people she's living with, and like things are happening, and she's just trying to solve this mystery and who's the bad guy. And she also wrote a lot of mysteries for children, or YA at that time, like, you know, 50s, 60s, 70s, things like that. This one, though, is completely different from all the other books I've read from Phyllis A. Whitney, and I've read a lot of them, like a lot when I was a kid. But so I don't know how many of this type that she wrote, but this is a drama in a way. Like a family, or, you know, the teenage growing up, because it's following, not Trina, it's following, what's her name? Sandy. Sandy is moving to a new town, and she's trying to make friends, but it's hard because there's like snooty rich girl that she's not getting along with, but then also her neighbor, Trina, no one likes her, and so the main character, that Sandy, doesn't really want to side with Trina, because then she'll be an outcast too. You know, that whole like, you know, middle school age stuff, your peer pressure and all of that. But then as the book goes on, she begins to like Trina more and more, although Trina's never exactly likable because she's very hostile, because she's been constantly picked on, and so she doesn't want anyone close to her. But this was an interesting enough read, and yeah, happy to read something completely different from Phyllis A. Whitney. If her name wasn't on this, I wouldn't have ever thought it was one of her books. Okay, so then let's go to my other category, which is all like the miscellaneous stuff that didn't fall in to any one of these reading events except for the TBR Clear Out. So, but first I'll get to the ebooks. I read a romantic suspense, I guess you would call it, by B.J. Daniels, Out of the Storm. This is a Buckhorn, Montana novel, and I found her through the Harlequin Intrigue line, which is like the thriller often can be like police procedural kind of novels. And this is, I think it's still published by Harlequin, but it isn't one of the category romance, falling exactly under that niche of Harlequin intrigue. But now I'm trying to remember what this book was about. Like I read through them quickly when I was okay, never mind. I'm like trying to think through. I read through some of these quickly before I sat down to film this so I can remember all these books. But this one is following the main character, who she's a widow, and she lost her husband to a big explosion in Texas, and she's now engaged after a long time. I think it's like 10 years. And they decide to go on a road trip, and they go all the way up to Montana, and they stop in this town, and she thinks she sees her dead husband, and of course, like, the fiance is like, how, I don't think you're correct, how can that be? And also the main sorry, I'm getting a phone call. I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted, but yeah, so she thinks she meets her ex-husband, or not, or the dead husband, but the dead husband guy, he doesn't recognize her at all. He has no idea what we were talking about, like, my name is such and such, and all this, but he has some burn scars, and he looks really similar to her dead husband. And so it progresses from there, and there is a mystery or a suspense element in here, because I don't want to give the story away, but it ends very weirdly, I will say. Like, one of the characters goes through several renditions of themselves, and it's just very odd. I feel like a very odd twist for the story. But I really like, B.J. Daniels' writing. She writes lots of like Western suspense books, and I will continue on with the series, but the ending threw me off a little bit. Then we have Shirley Jackson's The Lottery, a graphic adaptation, and this was adapted by Miles Hyman, which is Shirley Jackson's son, I want to say, son or grandson, but he is into like the arts, and so he adapts the Shirley Jackson's most famous short story, The Lottery, into a graphic novel, and it's very like stark kind of drawing, and it really fits the mood and tone of The Lottery. And so The Lottery is, for anyone who doesn't know, who hasn't read that story reading in high school or college, there is, on one day a year, these towns get together, and you put your name, your family name, in a box, and then they pick someone who is going to be stoned to death. And so this was very interesting to see in a graphic format, and I think it really works. And so, yeah, happy to have read that one. And then, speaking of happy to have read, this is a book I've never read, The Red Badge of Courage by Stephen Crane. This is the one audiobook I listened to this last month. I used to read a lot, or listen to a lot more audiobooks. I don't really much anymore, like maybe 1 or 2 a month. So this one is all about a young boy who is going off to war, and he's fighting on the Union side of the Civil War. And so you just follow the roller coaster ride of him, being patriotic, and then getting into the war, and like, oh my goodness, what did I get into? And so yeah, it follows his journey. So it's really interesting to listen to it as an audio, like visualizing all of that as you're listening to this character, talk about all the harrowing things that they're seeing. And I really like this cover. Okay, and then my favorite book of the month was Rules of Civility by Amor Towles. This is an author that I have heard about. Sorry, my feet are asleep, so I'm trying to move around for a second. They're all tingly. Okay, so this is an author I've heard about, and this book in particular I've heard about so much over the years, but I just never got around to reading it. I've never read any book by this author, and he wrote A Gentleman in Moscow and The Lincoln Highway. I'm not sure if those books are as popular as this one, but I have heard about those as well, in particular A Gentleman in Moscow. But I was just blown away by the writing style. I really liked it, the atmosphere that he was creating, because it's following the main character who is like up and coming in New York City, didn't come from a rich background, and not necessarily looking for wealth and the grand city living, but slowly you're following her as she's growing up and making her way through the different jobs and she's, failing here, but then, maybe this will step up, and that kind of like climbing the ladder, but it's never her being so driven about that. It's more about the people that she is friends with at the different times. There's the one friend in particular, I can't remember the character name, but was so interesting to read about. And I guess there's like a sequel to this following her journey as she makes her way to Los Angeles and what all this character is getting up to, because she very much is not embarrassed by anything. It's very courageous and but out for herself and looking out for herself kind of thing, but still a good friend for her during their time together. But I just love the cast of characters, and I'm not a huge like city person, so like New York City has never been a place I'm like, oh, I have to go there. But reading this and the different food that is talked about here and just the different areas of the city, I really, really want to visit New York City now. And let's see, the next one is Slay It with Flowers by Kate Collins. And let's see, this is a flower shop mystery. This is book 2. I read book 1 for March Mystery Madness. I found it at a little free library and really liked it, so I decided to read book 2. And this one I didn't care for as much. I really liked the plot in the first half. Second half, it went downhill. Not so much that I won't read book 3, but I was just like, it was a bit of a miss. That second, it had so much potential, I feel like. But this, following the main character who has a flower shop. She flunked out of law school, so gave up the dream of being a lawyer and decides to open a flower shop. And she also has like a flower shop slash a florist, shop slash coffee shop. And so she has this really like, it's in small town Indiana. And it's a really close-knit group of friends that are helping her with this. The mom is hilarious. The mom keeps dropping off these random off-the-wall sculptures that she's trying to sell. And there was a palm tree that was made out of green-shaped hands. And there was a footstool made out of feet. Like sculptures, of that. And it was just bizarre. But this is following where her friend is getting married, and she's been attempting to get married multiple times, but this is it. This is going to be the one. And so there's this party, the bachelorette party, where the bachelorettes and the bachelors are all getting together, and someone dies, and then they're all trying to figure out which one of the wedding party killed him. And so it had lots of potential, all these like this cast of characters, but it kind of went downhill a little bit for me. And then the last ebook I read was Ribsy by Beverly Cleary, and this is the final book in, what was the name of this series? I'm blanking on it. I didn't write the series down. But anyway, this is the final book, Henry Huggins series. Final book in that series. And as you can see from the cover, the collar is off this dog. It opens up with them going, well, first off, the dogs are just running loose in this town, I guess, and maybe that was the case back, because Beverly Cleary, she was born in, or like the early, like 1900, like 1920 or 1930, something like that, so that I guess there's no leash laws or anything, but it opens with the dog running alongside the car on the road as they're going shopping, and eventually they let the dog in, because the dog keeps chasing the car and doesn't go back home. So let the dog in the car, and then they park to go into the shopping center. And they roll the windows down just a little bit, and they go in the store. And the dog pushes down the window and escapes. And so this is his adventure of making his way slowly back home to Henry Huggins' house. And that part just threw me off. The whole like off leash and all of that. I mean, I run into so many off leash dogs here, it's not even funny. I've never lived in a place where there's so many off-leash dogs, and in places that you would never expect them. Like, speaking of like main streets, I've seen off-leash dogs on main road, busy streets, and with the owner like just strolling along, and their dog just zigzagging along the sidewalk and into the grass and over onto the parking lots and different things like that. And parks where there's signs saying, keep your dog on leash, school playgrounds. I mean, just like places, I just see them everywhere here. Like trails where no dogs are allowed, or trails where there's like, giant signs, saying we want to protect the nature and keep your dogs on leash. And it's harrowing for me, because you never know what you're going to encounter. And like, I have a dog myself, and she's always on leash, and so you never know what that interaction is going to be, and you're just surprised out of the blue. Anyway, I can go on a whole spiel of that, but I've never lived in a place where I encounter, like, if I encounter something like that, it's like once a year, all these different places I've lived in. But here in Portland, it's just rampant. But anyway, so then let's go into the category of these other books that I read. So the one other children's book I read, these are the other physical books I read off my shelf. So I read Gary Paulson's, and the sticker is covering, because I got this at a little free library. The sticker is covering the title, but it's How Angel Peterson Got His Name and Other Outrageous Tales About Extreme Sports. And so I've liked Gary Paulson's work, and so I was like, even though this is kind of a goofy cover, I was like, why not pick this up? And so this is about his boyhood experiences with his group of friends, and it even has a warning on the front. The dedication says, this book is dedicated to all boys in their 13th year. The miracle is that we live through it. And there's a foreword talking about, I want to talk about the accidents, and let me see, I should have flagged it, but yeah, a note of caution. Here it is, a note of caution. He said, we were quite a bit dumber then, and there wasn't any safety gear. And it talks about, read these stories, but don't do as we did as a kid. But his girlfriends get into, like, they parachute they parachute off things, and they ski behind a car that's pulling them, and they almost like break their neck multiple times. So just following a couple of different episodes of that with each of their different friends, and it's just it's like watching a train crash, but luckily we know the main character gets out of it, because Gary Paulson lives another day to write more stories. So this would be really good for, like he's saying, like, I feel like 8 to 13 or 14-year-old boys for sure. And then just switching gears completely, I read Diane Ackerman, Cultivating Delight: A Natural History of My Garden. And I thought this would be a perfect book to read in April, with it being spring. And there wasn't much artwork in here at all. There was just a little honeybee along each of the chapter headings. But this is following her in New York, and just her gardening throughout the year, and her love of plants, and going to farmers markets. And it was just a nice, quiet read. I read Land of the Burnt Thigh by Edith Eudora Cole, and this is the name of the book because an area where she settles in South Dakota was named Land of the Burnt Thigh, or like it's the Native Americans, their word for that area meant this. And so this is following two sisters who, and this is a nonfiction book, following two sisters who are living in, I think it was St. Louis, Missouri, and they go up when there's this big, opening of the land in South Dakota. And so they decide to take their opportunity, because their family isn't doing that well financially, and so they don't want to be a burden, and they are, just becoming adults. And so they decide to make their career out on the plains of South Dakota. And so they get this little shack of a place, and it's really empty field, and then eventually people start popping up around, but they're still miles away. And but somehow they still create a community, and Edith actually starts printing the local newspaper to just to help share the news and keep people connected, being so spread out. And then her sister becomes a school teacher for that area, and eventually their little shack becomes a newspaper printer and the local store for things and a post office. And so they're very busy, but they're making no money whatsoever. And so this was interesting to read about. Then I read Island in the Sound by Hazel Heckman, and this was again for the TBR Clear Out. I remember this was for the prompt of a book I might be losing interest in, I think, something like that, because it's creaky, and the spine did break when I was reading it, like I thought it would. It's just I don't know if you can hear it. It's so creaky. But this is about Anderson Island, up near the Seattle area, but it's very much not Seattle. It's it includes all the history of it, how it's like a farming little town, even in her day when this was written in 1967. So even in the 1960s, it still wasn't much populated, and it was just like their getaway from the city. And this is just following the history and what the locals are like. And I liked it enough, but it wasn't a compelling read. Maybe because I'm not familiar with this island. I'm not sure why I wasn't jiving with it. But funny enough, like the cover, I mean not the Dutch, but the build of this book and the story itself was just actually like fits that prompt perfectly of not being too interested in it, I guess. This is Wyoming Life, Body, Spirit, and History by Betty Starks Case. And this is, let's see, where do they live? They live near Riverton, Wyoming, and it's about her and her husband, how her husband is always up for adventure, so they live out in small town in Wyoming, close to the nature, so that he can go snowboarding and not snowboarding, skiing and the snowmobiling, even when they're older. And she's like, oh, I could break my neck or knees doing this, but I'm gonna join in. And so them doing that, being so much older than all the young hooligans, inspires the other people in their town to have these rides when they're like in their 60s or 70s. So it was fun to read. And there is pictures too, because they lived out on the outskirts of this small town, and they eventually moved in town. So this is a picture. It says fox kits emerge from sagebrush hiding place, and then curious fox moves closer to car. And so this tells like all the different nature that they see, you know, alongside the roads or at their farm or in the small town once they move in there. And so this was a nice read. It's a Wyoming author as well. This is a book I've had on my shelves for quite a while. And I think maybe it's like the title, something about that wasn't drawing me in, but happy to have read that one. And then the last physical book I read, the last book I'm going to talk about, is The Story of the Wilders by William Anderson. This is a biography of Almanza Wilder and the family from Farmer Boy. And this is the book for the TBR Clear Out. I think it was like the most recent purchase. And so I found this for $1 back in March. And so I have several of these little mini pamphlets by William Anderson, following the Ingalls, the Wilders, and there's one about Eliza Jane. I think, and then there's this, I think that might be, there's one on her Iowa story. So there's different aspects of Laura Ingalls Wilder life, and she wrote the Little House on the Prairie series, and so this is all about the different ending. I mean, not the endings, sound positive, but the different biographies of the family featured in Farmer Boy, and you know where they ended up, and what their life looked like. So there's different photographs here. This is the farmhouse that's featured in Farmer Boy, and it's much more built up and much nicer than Laura Ingalls Wilder's little log cabin, the little house in the big woods. This very much was an established home, and his father seemed to have done really well for most of his life. And it talks about like the sad ending because his daughter moved to Louisiana, and so he sold off his like well-established farm and moved down there, and then put his money into a rice plantation, and then lost everything, and then died like a year or two after that. Like heartbreak is what they were saying. Yes, this is Almanza when he lived in DeSmet, and when he met Laura Ingalls and was courting her, and this is him when he was 81 years old. So it just follows their life, and it gives you a little bit more insight if you're ever curious about Farmer Boy. And then he also is later in the series as well when he's courting her and they get married and things like that. So this was a nice quick read. So these are all the books I read in April. I've May on the brain because this is May 2nd, and so I just want to read all the books for May, but I didn't want to move on without wrapping up April. So anyway, I'll talk to you soon. Thanks, BookTube.